So, who wants to be a millionaire? Yeah, despite the fact that you basically never see him here, Limbo is actually quite solid for regular index runs and just might be the best choice for those attempting to kill John Prodman. While he doesn't have the DPS capabilities of someone like Mesa, he's extremely flexible in how he can approach the index and can be used as either a point carrier or for his crowd control, which when properly used can make the match much easier for all other players while also completely removing the enemy's ability to score at all, regardless of how long the match goes on or what mistakes Limbo's teammates make. Moreover, since none of his tricks are limited by the enemy's level, if you are going for longer runs, Limbo can last every bit as long as you need without any problems beyond eventually falling off in damage when compared to some of the higher DPS frames, and if you're targeting enemies inside of the stasis bubble, that damage reduction won't be by as much as you'd expect. So, if any of that interests you, keep watching and I'll show you how to bring a little rift magic to the index. But before we talk about the two strategies Limbo can pull off here, we need to talk about what sort of build you'll want to use in the index, especially since mine has been tweaked a bit from what I showed in my build videos. Like it was then, it's a maximized range and duration setup, but Rolling Guard came out after that video was created and is kind of awesome here, so you'll probably want it. My current setup's on screen now, and I'll include it down below for those who missed it. But pretty much as long as you have a lot of range, duration, and the Rolling Guard mod equipped, your build should be fine for both of the two strategies. As for what those actually are, well, they're both pretty straightforward and are used for somewhat different reasons. The first is what to do if you get into a match and discover you have no point carrier or just want to do the first round or so as fast as you can. In this case, you can use the Rift Walk and the Rolling Guard mod and take the role of a point carrier. Just slide out of the rift whenever you see a point, pick it up, and go back to the void. Also, if you're on round 1 or 2 of any difficulty, Rolling Guard's 3 seconds are usually more than enough to get a kill or two as long as you have a good burst damage weapon, so you can generally pick off enemies pretty safely early on. So while this strategy won't give you the ability to sit and fight quite like Rhino or someone, since Jad Turan can't disrupt Riftwalk or Rolling Guard, and the only things that can hit you in the Rift are attacks that you should definitely see coming, as long as you keep an eye on its timer and use Rolling Guard effectively, Limbo is one of the safest point carriers, and his weak ability to do damage won't matter all that much if you're just hanging around for 1 or 2 rounds. As for the other strategy, it's basically to be a goalie. Seriously, just drop a maximum range Cataclysm on the 10-0 goal, turn on stasis, and kill anything that comes near. As there's nothing on the map that can disable Cataclysm or stasis, this trick removes the enemy's ability to score at all, therefore keeping the timer from ever going down regardless of what happens and leaving as many points on the map as possible for your team to turn in themselves. It also freezes any enemies that touch your Cataclysm, so you should be able to kill any broker that spawns in that section of the map within seconds of them appearing, especially since even if they don't spawn inside of the bubble, they'll usually still seem to think they can charge right in and murder you inside of your zone of godhood. And since damage over time effects like Hunter Munitions and Tigris Bleed stack repeatedly and continue to do damage without ever wearing off as long as stasis is active, your damage effectively scales for as long as you need it to. Just remember to mark any points that fall so that your team knows where they are and that they should be picking them up, and to sneak out from time to time and grab energy orbs, and you should be perfectly fine for however long you want to be here. This strategy lasts basically forever and is impossible for the enemies to stop or get around unless you make some kind of major mistake like walking on top of one of Lockjaw's mines. This is in some ways the stronger of the two strategies, as it's perfectly usable on the first round and beyond, it can work in solo queue, it makes it impossible for the enemy to ever score and so reduce the timer, and it lasts far better through multiple rounds, even to the point that it can generally make teams that work with Limbo able to get to an hour in the index without that much problem. However, it does have a few issues. It can be a bit boring to do, especially if going for over an hour, as it's basically just sitting in one area, and you should only be stepping out of the rift when you need to either refresh your abilities or grab energy. Also, the average time for it can be noticeably slower on the first round if people don't know how to or aren't set up to work around this build, and if your team doesn't have a point carrier, it's going to be better to just take up that role yourself, rather than just sit in the goal and a less qualified frame try to do the job for you. Now, regardless of what strategy you decide to choose for a specific run, there are a few things you should know about. First, while Stasis and Cataclysm last their full duration, unfortunately, Banish does not. The first time you cast Banish, even with a maximized duration setup, you will likely only have about 6 to 7 seconds before the enemy leaves Banish, and then any other attempts to banish that particular enemy will result in an even shorter duration. This shouldn't be much of a problem, as point carriers generally won't have enough energy to reliably use Banish, and Goalies will already be inside of their Cataclysm, but it's worth knowing about. A much more important issue is that there are certain attacks you need to be looking out for. Specifically, Lockjaw and Soul's Mines and Azot's Fireballs can damage you while you're in the Rift. Also, the Laser Barrage from 002ER and the Gas Trail created by the Raptor can both actually harm you while they are rifted and stasis, but these are sort of bugs, as they only happen if they start their attacks while outside of the Rift and then enter a stasis Cataclysm. If they are not in the Rift at all when they do these attacks, they should not be able to hit you with them, but you should still be aware of these and try and keep an eye out for them if they're about to enter your Cataclysm. As for what kind of team works with Limbo, this varies depending on what strategy you're going to be using, but generally you'll want to work with some kind of damage source. The best frame for this is likely to be Mesa, as she can be banished and move wherever on the map she needs while still accessing all of her Peacemaker's damage. But Excalibur can do basically the same thing, and presumably Titania can as well, though you guys are rarer than Limbo and I haven't actually been able to test this out with a good one yet. As for point carriers, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing the first strategy, you don't really need a second carrier, and for the Goalie setup, a point carrier of some sort is of course going to be great, but if someone squishy does somehow grab all the points, Limbo can just banish them and they should be able to get to the other goal without any issue. And finally, let's talk about weapons. Limbo can be used with quite a few things, but personally I think a sniper rifle is probably the best choice here. They work fantastically well with hunter munitions and stasis, headshots are basically effortless, and they allow you to sneak out of the Rift and fight relatively safely from long range if the enemy decides to only spawn on the other side of the map for a bit. Otherwise, bleed and gas weapons in general are going to be wonderful thanks to stasis, and burst damage weapons of some sort work well with Rolling Guard's playstyle, and as long as your weapons focus on at least one of those two things, you should be fine. So, yeah, Limbo's a solid pick for the Index. He's only slightly worse of a point carrier than something like Rhino because of his lack of staying power in fights, but if you're reasonably well equipped, that's not a problem for the first 100 or so points of high risk index, and you should actually be even harder to take down than Rhino if you can get comfortable with using Rolling Guard in the Rift. And if you have a coordinated team or get lucky enough to run into a group of randoms who can work well with the Goalie playstyle, you can do 2 runs in roughly 10 to 12 minutes and even stay for over an hour without any significant issues beyond just falling asleep while waiting for Prodman to show up with your poster. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you later. Farewell.